Okay, good morning. Happy Tuesday. Happy 10 a.m. on Tuesday. It's time for our weekly webinar. Good to see everybody. It's February 22nd. It's been a few weeks. It's been a few weeks since we had a live talk on this webinar. Anyway, I've sent you some information or some videos that I did with David McKnight. There was a 5-part video series. I hope you had an opportunity to look at them and watch those videos. I thought they were really interesting. I guess that's very self-serving that I thought the videos were interesting, but it's always good to chat with David McKnight. And I'm going to see him in a couple weeks at his home, but I'm looking forward to spending a couple days with this group of people. I was invited to attend this mastermind group in Puerto Rico, which I was very, very excited. There's only 10 of us in the country who were invited to go there, so I'm really looking forward to that. And Dave's going to be one of the featured speakers as well there. So I'm excited. But so you had an opportunity to look at that 5-part series. If you're a client, you also had the opportunity to join us last week for the client-only investment strategy webinar that we had. We had Thomas Byelich from Cornerstone Portfolio Research, who was our group that helps us with research, implementation, and development of our portfolios and individual client accounts. So that was the first of the webinars that we've done. We're planning on doing them semi-annually, right around semi-annually. So a couple times a year, we'll have Thomas back or other parts of the investment committee, if not Thomas, or maybe in addition to Thomas. But so we've had some good information, I think, for sure, coming out to you, if not these weekly webinars. Today on today's weekly webinar, we're going to follow our usual format. We're going to talk about some information we have from the Ed Slott group, that comes out of the elite advisor group that I'm fortunate to be part of. And then we're going to talk about the markets. And then our financial planning topic for our Financial 15 today is, what do I do? How do I fix a missed 60-day IRA rollover? If I miss my 60-day window, how do I fix that? There are some potential fixes for that, so we're going to talk about it. And we've got some upcoming events. So we have some live classes starting. So we just finished a series of webinar classes, the Changing World of Retirement Planning classes. We have a series of live classes that are beginning on April 25th. So we're going to have a series of Thursday classes, April 25th and May 2nd. And we're going to have a series of Tuesday classes from April 30th and May 7th. So keep an eye out for that. If you're local, hi, Doug. How are you? Good to see you. Thank you for always saying hello, Doug. If you're local in the area and you want to attend the live classes, we'd love to have you. We also have a tentative date for the movie we're going to share with you, The Baby Boomer Dilemma. That's going to be shown on May 23rd at the Newtown Theater, and that'll be hosted, of course, by us. We already talked about the series of podcasts or webinars I did with David McKnight, and we talked about the client webinar that we had last week. Had a lot of great feedback from that. I really appreciate the great questions that we received from our clients. And again, that was a client-only event. And very excited to tell you that we're closing in quickly on on what will be Attleboro U. So that'll be a separate website that'll hold all of this education material that we put out on a regular basis. So what I've done is I've created a few courses from the nearly 200 videos that I've done since the pandemic, with all the different topics that we've talked about and even updates to those topics. So I've created some online courses that you can go through. And the good news is, if you're a client, you have full access to this. There's no cost. You simply get a membership, log on information, and you'll be able to access all the webinars that we have, all what we call the Financial 15s, and all the courses that are going to be on the website. Now, that'll change if you're not a client. All the information on YouTube will be set so that you'll have to access it through the website, but you'll be able to purchase full memberships or just individual courses. So that's it'll be accessible for sure. And what I want to be able to do with that is, I have people who come to us and we can't help everybody, but I want to be able to have folks have the resources and have it laid out in a way that makes sense and they can act on it. because there's, when you suddenly have 200 videos, and it feels sudden, but when you suddenly have nearly 200 videos out there, I'm often saying to someone, well, I have a video on that. And if you're talking about backdoor Roth contributions, for example, and I say, I have a video on that. You can search it through YouTube, or I send them a link, and I want something where there can be a catalog and people can easily find it. So that'll be known as Attleboro U, and that is coming soon. All right, let's. Here's some headlines for you. So I thought this was interesting from the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. This is a really great organization that does a lot of research about the fiscal health of our country and potential ways to address it. But they noted that we spend $2 billion a day on interest on the national debt today. So interest rates have come up. We all know that. It was a little easier to keep your head in the sand about our national debt when interest rates were so low, when they were less than 1% for many, many years. But now that the 10-year Treasury is, hovering in the mid 4s, 4% range or above, you've got to pull your head out of the sand. $2 billion a day is being paid just on interest on the national debt. They write that 68% of voters say that rising interest costs on the national debt make it more urgent for lawmakers to form a bipartisan fiscal commission. And they went on to talk about that 92% of voters are more likely to support candidates backing a commission to reduce the national debt. So I hope that our politicians are hearing me. All of the congressmen and senators and the people, the policymakers in the country who religiously log onto this webinar, hear me that 92% of voters are more likely to support candidates backing a commission to reduce the national debt and hopefully address other issues. And that includes 92% of Democrats and 94% of Republicans. More than 9 in 10 people support that. So that's exciting, and hopefully people start hearing that, we have another deadline coming up on Friday for a partial government shutdown. I'm sure that's, here we are Tuesday. That'll go right till probably, the last minute on Friday. But not to be doom and gloom, but we have to pay attention again. We have to pull our head out of the sand because we do have methods for protecting ourselves and our loved ones against the what are going to be higher costs and really out of control costs. They're already out of control, but the fixes that are going to have to happen to handle these out of control costs within a short period of time. That window is getting very, very narrow. So it is time now to take advantage of some of these things that we have. All right, so let's jump into our portion with the Slott Group. I'm going to share with you this letter from Sarah Brenner, our friend Sarah Brenner. So this came out last Wednesday. And Sarah talks about making a 2023 IRA contribution. Here are 4 rules that may surprise you. I thought this was interesting, as Sarah's letters typically are. She writes, the tax season is upon us. This is the time when many individuals fund their IRAs by contributing for the prior year. So I have this conversation often. You can, of course, potentially contribute for 2024 if you meet the requirements, income restrictions, things like that. But you still, if you haven't already contributed for 2023, you can still contribute up to the tax filing deadline. Excuse me. Contributing to an IRA may seem pretty straightforward, and in many ways it is, but there can be twists. Here are 4 rules that may surprise you when you make your 2023 IRA contribution. So if you're following along, I'm sharing this with you. If you're just listening, we're at this section 1 here. If you can see my cursor, that is number 1, file first and fund later. Frequently during tax season, we are asked if an IRA contribution must be made before the tax return is filed. The answer is no. This is not a requirement. You can claim a deduction for your 2023 IRA contribution now when you file your taxes and fund it later. Some people even fund their IRA contribution with their tax refund if the timing is right. Just don't wait too long. If you claim the contribution, be sure you get it done before the deadline. So you, of course, have to do it, get the contribution in by the tax filing deadline, but it doesn't mean that you have to wait to file your taxes to do the contribution. Number 2, spousal contributions can help. Not working outside the home doesn't necessarily count you out when it comes to saving for retirement by making a 2023 IRA contribution. If your spouse has taxable compensation for the year, you can make a spousal contribution to your IRA based on your spouse's taxable compensation. Yes, you can still build your retirement savings as a stay-at-home spouse. This is something that surprises me that people they forget about it or they don't realize. When we're talking about ways to fund Roth IRAs, we want to shift as much as we can over to that, the right amount over to that tax-free or tax-advantaged side of the ledger. So things that are never going to be taxed again. We talk about contributions and we talk about Roth conversions. So when I remind people or tell people, well, first we want to look at contributions, and I tell them because of your income, you can actually make a contribution. You can have, if you have earned income, you can make a contribution. And if you're not below certain income levels, you can make that Roth IRA contribution. And I'll tell them that not only can you make it for yourself, but if everything lines up for you, you can also make it for your spouse. And often I hear people say, oh, I didn't realize that. So this is just a reminder. Spousal contributions can be done. Again, there are some limitations you have to pay attention to, but generally spousal limitations can be done. Number 3, no age limits for IRA contributions. Think you are too old to contribute to an IRA? It's time to reconsider. The rules have changed. It used to be that contributions were not permitted to a traditional IRA once you reached the year you turned age 70 and a half. But the Secure Act did away with this restriction. There have never been age limits for Roth IRA contributions. The bottom line is that you can be any age and make a 2023 contribution to either a traditional or IRA or a Roth IRA. This could be helpful for those who work part-time in retirement and do not need the income. So this is something people are stuck on. People get stuck on these old rules because I do hear this. Well, I'm too old to make a traditional IRA contribution. Well, that rule changed several years ago now, after the change of the Secure Act. So it's really important to stay on top of these things. You can do that by listening to these webinars. You know, this is why I read these updates, these reports, because it reminds you. I know that when you attend a class or you meet with us for the first time, it's a lot of new information. It's often looking at things differently than you have in the past. So this repetition is very, very important. You folks who are, Doug is on here every week, and he reminds himself every week, unless he's traveling to some far exotic, fun place, he reminds himself every week why he's doing the things he's doing to set himself up for a better retirement, right? Where he doesn't have to worry about tax risk and all these different things, tax rate risk, and for himself and his family. So I think that's great. So do that. We just spend the time listening to these webinars. And if you can't, I know that everyone can't attend on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Some of you are still working, or you have pickleball, or you have something else you're doing. And that's okay, because everything's available and you can listen. I re-listened to those 5 episodes from David McKnight when I was sending them out to people, because I didn't edit those. Dave did. So I just wanted to make sure that I kind of remembered what we talked about and made sure that everything was good that was in there. So I listened to it while I was doing things around the house, cleaning up in the kitchen or taking care of the chickens or something like that. So, and I know a lot of other people do that too, but this repetition is very, very important. So remember, no age limits for IRA contributions, no extensions for IRA contributions. So you have to have this done by the tax filing deadline, not including extensions. No extensions for IRA contributions. You may be able to get more time to file your taxes, but that will not help you with your IRA contribution. The deadline for making your 2023 traditional or Roth IRA contribution is April 15th, 2024. And that filing deadline changes every year, because if it falls on a holiday or a weekend, that changes. This is true even if you have an extension of time to file your taxes. Okay, Roth conversions and inherited IRAs. This is the Slott mailbag. So these are letters that are written in by basic consumers or even financial advisors, CPAs, attorneys, things like that. So here's the question, and this is from our friend Andy. If an individual has both an IRA and a 401k and wants to convert the IRA to a Roth IRA, does he have to take both the IRA and the 401k RMD, that's a required minimum distribution, before doing Roth conversions? So I want to read that again because it's a little confusing. You should know now, I think you know, that before you do any Roth conversions and you're required to take required minimum distributions, you must first complete that required minimum distribution. If you do your Roth conversion prior to your required minimum distribution, the IRS sees any distribution out of the IRA first done as the as the required minimum distribution. So a Roth conversion is in fact a distribution from an IRA. It's just a distribution from an IRA that's allowed to go back into a Roth IRA. They're allowed to be placed into a Roth IRA. But if you don't do them in chronological order, do your RMD first, it's going to mess up your Roth conversion calculation. So let me reread this question. If an individual has both an IRA and a 401k, and wants to convert the IRA to a Roth IRA, does he have to take both the IRA and the 401k RMD, required minimum distribution, before doing a Roth conversion? Thanks for your kind attention. So I'd be interested to hear what people think about this, and I think the answer may be different than what you think. So let me scroll down here. So here's the answer. For things like Roth conversions, the pro rata rule and RMD aggregation rules, for things like, let me start over. For things like Roth conversions, the pro rata rule, and RMD aggregation rules, IRAs and 401k plans are completely independent of each other. Yes, you do need to take your IRA RMD prior to doing a Roth conversion of any portion of the remaining IRA dollars. However, your 401k has no impact on this transaction. If you wish, you can wait and take your 401k RMD later in the year after the Roth IRA conversion. Now, you may say this is contrary to what I just said, but it's not, because you're talking about two different things. And I say this all the time. Retirement plans and IRAs feel similar. They act, whether they're Roth or traditional. Let's focus on traditional, though. 401ks, 403bs, 457 plan, all those retirement plans and traditional IRAs feel similar, but they have very different rules, especially when you're talking about 401ks and 403bs. So you can't aggregate them for RMDs. You can't. They're treated very, very differently. So think of them as different. You can't, if you have a $100,000 RMD due between your 401ks and your IRAs, for example, you cannot just say, well, I'm going to take that whole $100,000 out of my IRA and let it continue to build up in my 401k. That's against the rules. You cannot aggregate those things. You can aggregate IRAs. That's no problem, but when you can't cross retirement plans and IRAs. I hope that makes sense. So the rules are very separate. So what Andy's saying here is, again, the plans are completely, IRAs and 401k plans are completely independent of each other. So if you're doing a Roth conversion from a traditional IRA, you must take the RMD out of that traditional IRA first before you do the Roth conversion, but you can wait for the 401k RMD for later in the year if you want to. I know it's confusing, and that's why you've got to listen and learn and work with somebody who understands this. So here's the next one. So hello, I hope you can help out with my question. What is the proper way to rename an inherited IRA or Roth IRA? This is a good one too. And is there a time frame in which this must be done? And in the case that the original beneficiary passes away before the account is emptied under the 10-year rule, does the successor beneficiary have to once again rename the IRA to Roth IRA? If so, what is the proper way and time frame to do that? So the person's asking, if I inherit an IRA, do I have to rename it a certain way? And then if I die and the successor beneficiary inherits that same IRA, does that also have to be retitled and changed? Just to simplify that. It was really difficultly written. All right, so here's the answer. So when it comes to titling an inherited IRA, the deceased IRA owner's name must remain on the inherited IRA account title, and the account title must indicate that it is an inherited IRA by using the word beneficiary or beneficiary IRA or inherited IRA. There is no universal format. It just must be clear that it is an inherited IRA. For example, John Smith IRA, deceased 11/27/22, for the FBO is for the benefit of FBO John Smith Jr., beneficiary. If the first beneficiary, John Smith Jr., were to pass away before the end of the 10-year rule, the successor beneficiary would have to retitle the account in a similar fashion, such as John Smith Jr., beneficiary, IRA, deceased 1/10/24, for the benefit of Sally Smith, successor beneficiary. There is no official deadline for retitling an account as an inherited IRA. However, for many beneficiaries, December 31st of the year after the year of death may be the deadline for taking the first RMD. To process this correctly, setting up a properly titled inherited IRA by this date is necessary. Also, if there are multiple beneficiaries having retitled inherited IRAs, established by the December 31st date ensures that the separate accounting requirements are met. This allows each beneficiary to use as long as possible payout period under the RMD rules. RMD rules are very, very complicated, folks. They get more complicated with every change in the tax code, so that's just another example. All right, now let's talk about the markets. So I'm going to share with you our analyst report. You met the folks from Cornerstone, and they help us with our market analysis every week. We appreciate that. So the weekend review from February 19th to February 23rd, the leading economic index fell. That came out in that prior or last week, 0.4% in January, worse than the 0.2% decline seen in December. The board noted, however, that this was the first time in 2 years that 6 of the 10 components were positive contributors over the past 6-month period, and that the index is no longer signaling a recession, but rather a second quarter and third quarter slowdown of gross domestic product growth to near zero. So what do our analysts say? They say the index hasn't been as accurate as a forecasting tool as it has been in the past, but the modest improvement is encouraging, and the leading economic index may yet prove useful if we see economic growth slow in the coming months. The Fed minutes, this was a big one, but no big shocks because of the press releases from our Fed chair. But the notes from the most recent FOMC meeting at the end of January showed that most participants noted the risks of moving too quickly to ease the stance of policy. That's in quotes. The minutes also noted that the, quote, policy rate was likely at its peak for the tightening cycle. So that was really the report that kind of shook the markets. I guess it was last week because there's been a lot of speculation about declining interest rates, and this very clearly says we're going to hold pat here for a while until we see what's going on. So our analysts say not a lot of surprises as Fed Chairman Powell was forthcoming in his press conference, but the minutes reiterated, so maybe that was 2 weeks ago after the press conference, but the minutes reiterated that the FOMC needs to see more evidence that inflation will remain on its gradual downward path, and the risk of loosening policy too soon outweigh the risk of keeping policy tight for too long. So loosening policy would mean lowering interest rates. Tightening is increasing interest rates or holding where they are. They talked about NVIDIA, which is unusual for our analysts. They typically don't talk about individual companies. And I think they mentioned that in here, but they write, the chip maker for the AI technology reported earnings after the closing bell of the market on Wednesday that greatly exceeded expectations and set off a global stock surge. And they write, we don't often report on a single company, and we won't comment on NVIDIA specifically in this report. But the stock is of such importance right now that it pushed global stocks higher. We are believers in much of the promise of AI, but there will be times, and this might be one, where the enthusiasm gets a little ahead of reality, they say. So what's coming out this week? Well, today was durable goods. So we saw that durable goods fell 6.1%. What was expected was 4.5%. So we'll have to see how the market responds to that. Durable goods is this manufacturing data recently, and the report gives a look at orders for goods meant to last more than 3 years. So on Thursday, we have the PCE index, and that's a measure of the prices that people living in the United States or those buying on their behalf pay for goods and services. This is the Fed favorite inflation gauge and is always closely watched, and perhaps even more so this time around after a few hotter than expected inflation readings. So we'll have to pay attention to what the PCE report is on Thursday and see how the Fed responds to that. And we all know that stocks traded lower for the first part of the holiday shortened week. And they talked again about NVIDIA, and that started this risk on buying more stock rally. They write, some froth may have built up in stocks after brief pullback. Some froth may have built up in stocks, and a brief pullback wouldn't be a surprise, and we suggest checking allocations to ensure the recent move higher hasn't resulted in an overly concentrated position in technology stocks. So that's a really good point. We talked a lot on our webinar last week about rebalancing. So what Cornerstone's talking about there is, with this surge in certain parts of the stock market, specifically technology, it's good to check things to make sure that now we're not suddenly overweighted in areas that we don't want to be overweighted in. Because while we've had this nice tech rally going on for some time now, we want to make sure that we're not building up too much of a position in certain types of stocks, and then when we have a correction, that could really hurt us in the future. And that's really the basics of rebalancing a portfolio. So let's talk some specifics. What happened last week in the market? The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 1.3%. The Dow was up 4.1% for the year. The S&P 500 was up 1.68%. The S&P 500 is up almost 7% for the year. The NASDAQ was up 1.41%, and that takes us to 6.6% for the year. Still 39.2% year over year. So from this time last year to this time this year, the NASDAQ is still up 40%. Our MSCI World Index, that's the broadly largest companies in the world, not including the U.S., that was up 1.38% last week for a year-to-date return of 2.31. So everything except for actually all the stock indices that we have in front of us here were up. The bond market was up slightly at 0.25%, still down for the year at 1.77%. And again, that's at Barclays U.S. Aggregate Bond Index, where most people have their bonds. The short-term bonds, so that's the 1 to 3 year bonds, that was up 0.03%, and that index is down also, but only 0.05%. So I think we have a report here from BlackRock. Yes, I did pull this little snippet from the iShares group in BlackRock, the part of their market analysis. And I thought this was interesting because the headline reads, "What do elections mean for markets?" So, here we're coming into another crazy election year. I'm not going to comment on the craziness out there, but it typically means uncertainty, which typically means volatility in the markets. So they had a little different take on it. So I'm just going to read to you what BlackRock had to say. They wrote, "While this year's elections will have significant impacts on public policy, the impact on markets in the long term has historically been limited. Stock markets crave certainty. When there is lack of certainty in outcomes, we tend to see market volatility rise ahead of elections." So like I just said, when we don't know who's going to be in the White House and who's going to make up Congress, we're not sure, but mostly the White House, we see a lot of volatility. They go on to write, "Policy uncertainty looks to be the primary culprit, with dispersion at its widest following elections in which power changes hands. However, with two known entities likely to secure their party's nominations, this election may well break from history. Policy priorities from each other are well known, as are their respective track records in office, an unusual situation. As a result, investors may dust off old playbooks assured by policy certainty." So what they're saying is that we may not see that cycle of volatility going into the fall elections, because if the two candidates who seem to be the two candidates who are going to get their party's nominations, everybody kind of has an idea of what their policies are. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought I'd share it with you. All right, moving into our Financial 15. All right, this is the section we call the Financial 15. So if you're just joining us, we're going to talk today during this Financial 15 about how to fix a missed 60-day IRA rollover. We're going to talk about what that is. What's a 60-day rollover? Why do a 60-day rollover? Some alternatives. And then if you make a mistake and you miss your window, how you might be able to fix that. And if you're just joining us and you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe, notification, and like button. And make sure you come back and join us for one of our weekly webinars. So what is a 60-day rollover? So a 60-day rollover is when you take a check from your IRA, not from retirement plan. We'll come back to that. But you take a check made out to your name. So if I receive a check from my IRA made out to Mark Byelich, and my intention is to put it back in that IRA or another IRA within 60 days. The IRS allows that. They say, okay, you can take a distribution from your IRA. You can hold on to it for 60 days. And then during that 60 days, you can decide where you're going to put it. You're going to put it in a bank. You're going to put it in Vanguard. You're going to put it in Schwab. You're going to do whatever you want with it. It just has to be done in 60 days. So what happens, though, if you don't get it redeposited within those 60 days? Well, if you're under 59 and a half, you have a 10% penalty on that, and you have to pay tax on that distribution. If you're over 59 and a half, well, good news. You don't have the 10% penalty, but you have to pay tax on that distribution. So my goodness, if your check is $1 million that you say, well, I'm really upset with this institution. I'm going to take my $1 million out of there and I'm going to do something differently with it. I'm going to figure out what to do with it. And you miss that deadline, you've got a real big tax bill in your hands. But listen, if it's even if it's $10,000 and you didn't intend for it to happen, and you intended to get that money over to the IRA, and you missed that deadline, 60 days goes fast, folks. How many of us have received something in the mail, put it on the desk, and had something in our lives take over? And suddenly you said, oh my goodness, I got this 3 weeks ago. I got this 30 days ago. Hopefully you didn't get it 60 days ago. But things can get pushed aside sometimes, especially when life events occur. So I'm going to come back to this, why do a 60-day rollover? But that is what a 60-day rollover is. And it's not from a retirement plan, not from a 401k or 403b, for example. These plans require that the check be made out to the custodian. There's really no way to mess this up unless you're doing a full distribution, which they make sure that you understand all the issues with doing that distribution. And it's very clear that that's not going into an IRA. So with a 401k plan or 403b plan, the distributions are already made out to the custodian. So what does that mean? What's going to happen is the check is going to be made out to let's do Jane Smith. Actually, it's going to be made out to the custodian. So custodian is, for example, we use Charles Schwab. So let's say Schwab. It's actually Charles Schwab and Company, but I'm just going to write Schwab for the benefit of Jane Smith. So what that means is that Jane cannot take that check and cannot put it into a bank account. So I'm going to do Charles Schwab and Company just to fill that and complete that. But Jane cannot take that check and deposit it into an IRA account, or she can't deposit it into her bank account. She can, in fact, deposit it to her IRA account, but she can't deposit it into a bank account. She can't spend that money. It can only go into the IRA account it's intended for. So that is what's called a direct transfer or a direct rollover. And that is the best way to handle these transfers. So if your true intention is to remove money from your IRA and deposit it into another IRA or into even a 401k, but let's stay with the IRA because that's where you see the problems. So let me go back. If your true intention is to receive that IRA money and redeposit it into another IRA account, just figure out where you want it to go first and have it properly set up so that it can only be deposited into that IRA. When you do that, you don't have this issue with your 60-day rollover. It really could take nearly as long as you'd like it to. But if you have that check made out to the custodian and do a proper direct transfer, direct rollover, then once you pass the 60 days, it doesn't matter. If you don't deposit that check for 90 days, you're still in good shape. Now, there could be an issue with the life of the check, and you may have to get it reissued. And that's a whole other thing. But we're talking about the tax law rules, the IRS rules about this. So you can't do it you can't do a 60-day rollover from a retirement plan. It's too easy to do it from IRA to IRA. All you got to do is ask the custodian for a check, and you've got 60 days to do that, and that's where the trouble comes in. And the difference between this here and this IRA 60-day rollover is that you're in the middle of it, right? So the IRA owner, the check is made out in your name, and that's where the trouble arises. So why do a 60-day rollover? Folks, I don't know why anybody would do a 60-day rollover. It doesn't make things simpler. It makes things more challenging. You can't, some people will say, I'm going to use it as a 60-day loan. I'm going to buy a car. I'm going to need $50,000 to buy a car. I'm going to take it out of my IRA. And in that time, then I'm going to get financing and I'm going to put it back, or I'm going to sell my other car, whatever it may be. But there's got to be another way to handle that. There's, maybe wait to buy the car or delay buying the house or some reason that you're using this 60-day rollover, because it is just fraud, especially if you're thinking about a house and you need hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. And if you suddenly end up missing that 60-day window, because we haven't even talked about the 1 year per rollover rule, and that makes this even more complicated. Because someone might say, well, I can just, if I'm having an issue with settling my house, for example, and maybe that 60-day window is getting really close, I can put the money back and I just take it out again. You can't do that either, because now we have this 1 year per year rollover rule. So some people say they want to do this 60-day loan. I think that's a really bad idea, and it just opens the doors to too many issues. So if somebody knows why, give me a good reason why you may want to do a 60-day IRA rollover. I'm happy to listen. The alternatives are too easy, and the alternative is simply a direct transfer. Have that check made out to you, right to the custodian. The custodian doesn't own the money, folks. You do. They're just holding it for you, and they're making sure that it's done correctly. So why do a 60-day rollover? Really no reason. Use the alternative, direct transfer, direct rollover, whatever one you want to call that. Your custodian should help you through it. But what happens if you do? What happens if you make this mistake? You take a distribution on your own. What caused this is that we actually had this. We had a client who had a small IRA. They wanted to make things easier. They just said, okay, let me take a distribution. I'll put it back in the IRA. And some things happened, and the check didn't make it on time. So we talked about, okay, there is a process for this self-certification. So the IRS said in 2016, it's been renewed in 2020, as recently as 2020, but they developed this self-certification. The reason is this was the most common request for a private letter ruling. PLR is a private letter ruling. The private letter ruling basically is a letter that's issued to the IRS saying, we made a mistake. Here's how we're fixing it. Please waive the penalties. Because again, if you're under 59.5, less than 59.5, it's 10% penalty plus tax. If you're over 59.5, it's tax. And you may not want to pay tax on any of that money. And what if you already did some Roth conversions and you've maxed out your Roth conversions, and now you do the 60-day rollover for $100,000 and you weren't counting on that income, and that fills up that marginal tax rate and it's putting you over the taxes that you wanted to pay. Again, there's just too many potential issues with this. So it was the most common private letter ruling saying, I made a mistake. I missed the window. I missed the window for this reason. I was ill. I didn't get the check in the mail. My financial institution made a mistake. There were several common, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. There were several common excuses or reasons why this didn't happen. And the IRS said, okay, we're going to develop this self-certification because these private letter rulings, the average cost of a private letter ruling for this was over $10,000. So That's a lot, right? $10,000 to get this cost waived. So think about how many weren't done because of that form. So the IRS said, okay, we're gonna help you fix this, and we're going to set this up. So they created this self-certification. So I tried to make this as simple as possible, but this is IRS code. So, that's not always easy. So let me just bring this up here. This is an excerpt of the code. So I'm going to read this to you. So the purpose of this section, and this section is, whoa, see that? Purpose of the section of this IRS code. This revenue procedure modifies and updates procedure 2016-47, those procedures that are listed there. And it provides a list of permissible reasons for self-certification of eligibility for a waiver of the 60-day rollover requirement. In response to requests from stakeholders, this revenue procedure modifies that list by adding a new reason. And now, so there used to be 11, now there's 12 reasons. And this was a distribution was made to a state unclaimed property fund, because it's another thing. These custodians will hold these funds that are in IRA for a period of time, and then they'll send them to the state. As under Revenue Procedure 2016-47, a self-certification relates only to the reasons for missing the 60-day deadline, not to whether a distribution is otherwise eligible to be rolled over. This revenue procedure provides examples of situations in which a distribution would not be eligible to be rolled over, and then it added some other things. And one of the good things that it added on here was an example of the letter that they want you, the IRS says, send this letter to the custodian to certify. All right, so let's go on here. And here is the list of reasons. So here's your self-certification. Again, this is part of the code, and if you want to go to that code, I have I'll put the link in the description. But again, the bulletin or procedure is procedure 2020-46 is the new updated procedure. So revenue procedure 2020-46. All right, so here's the list of reasons. So there can be, and there's some conditions. So condition number 1, no prior denial, right here. No prior denial by the IRS. The IRS may not have previously denied a waiver request with respect to a rollover of all or part of the distribution to which the contribution relates. And then number 2, right here. Reason for missing 60-day deadline. The taxpayer must have missed the 60-day deadline because of the taxpayer's inability to complete the rollover due to one or more of the following reasons, and they listed 12. And the first one, under A here, subsection A, an error was committed by the financial institution receiving the contribution or making the distribution to which the contribution relates. That happens. So they were getting that all the time on these private letter ruling letters. So they said, okay, let's include that. Again, you're self-certifying this. The distribution having been made in the form of a check was misplaced and never cashed. Imagine that. You get it in the mail, you set it aside, something happens in your life, and suddenly that 60 days goes by like that. The distribution was deposited into and remained in an account that the taxpayer mistakenly thought was an eligible retirement plan. You mistakenly put it into a bank account. That is not an IRA, but you think it's a bank account. So now you have the ability to self-certify and fix that. The taxpayer's principal residence. So now we're on D. The taxpayer's principal residence was severely damaged. A member of the taxpayer's family died. Letter F. If the taxpayer or a member of the taxpayer's family was seriously ill, the taxpayer was incarcerated. Letter G. H is restrictions were imposed by a foreign country. I've never seen that one, but I'm sure they see it because it's on here. A postal error occurred, got lost in the mail maybe. J is the distribution was made on account of a levy under subsection 6331, and the proceeds of the levy have been returned to the taxpayer. So that has to do with the IRS taking the money and then giving it back. K, the party making the distribution to which the rollover relates delayed providing information that the receiving plan or IRA required to complete the rollover despite the taxpayer's reasonable efforts to obtain the information. Or The distribution was made to a state unclaimed property fund. You've got to remedy it as soon as practical. There's a 30-day safe harbor. So that's just saying once you recognize this issue, you've got to resolve it as soon as possible. Now, they gave us the format. And again, I'm pulling this all from the IRS website, and you can do that as well. But they basically wrote out the letter for us, folks. So I know this is really hard to see because, it's a lot of information. Let me just pull me out of here so you can see the whole screen. But this is the format. So it's really simple, and it lists, your greetings. It refers to the procedure in the body. I'm here, right? It refers to the procedure here. You got to put in the dollar amount. It says that you miss a 60-day rollover. Refers to the procedure again, and then you got to choose reasons for late contribution. You missed the 60-day rollover because. So maybe you were ill, and you lost the check during the time. So maybe they're your two things. So you take that, you sign it, and then where do you send it? You don't send it to the IRS, folks. You send it to your custodian along with your check, and they record it on a form, what's called Form 5498, as a late 60-day rollover, and they have the form to go along with it. So the 5498 actually does not have a date stamp on it, and I've heard people say, well, just return. I'm trying to find the original list. Just return it, and there's no date on there, but that's really risky. Don't do that either. We have the ability now for this self-certification. The IRS has given us 12 pretty broad excuses. I mean, some of them aren't so broad, like incarceration or some kind of foreign government activity, but there aren't, unless you were truly trying to just do a 60-day loan and it didn't work out for you, which isn't allowed. It's actually not allowed as part of the procedure. Most people, if it's a true error, are going to fit one of those 12 reasons. So the IRS gave us the reasons. It gave us the allowances. It gave us the form. All you got to do is copy it, put in some of the things that they require, which is your name, your address, and all that, and then the dollar amount, and then send it in. But the thing is, there's no reason to have to do this. There's just no reason to have to do this because it's so simple. It's so simple to avoid. All you do is, if you want to take money out of your IRA and move it to another IRA, just have it made out in the custodian's name. So if you custody with Charles Schwab, like we do, you have it made out to Charles Schwab and Company for the benefit of you. And it doesn't matter. If you custody with Vanguard, you have it made out to Vanguard for the benefit of you. And it doesn't matter. Then you don't run into these issues. It's really, really simple. It's for this to be one of the most requested private letter rulings, and they had to go out and create a form of something that is so easy to avoid, is just beyond me. But it happens, so it's okay. Again, it used to be a really common practice to do these 60-day rollovers, especially for 60-day loans and IRAs, especially before that one rollover per year rule, but there's no reason for it now. So I hope that's helpful. I hope you found this whole thing helpful. If you want information, if you want to review the revenue code, I'll put the link in the description. If you have specific questions for us, you can reach us at questions@attleborowealth.com. That's questions@attleborowealth.com. If you want to watch any previous weekly webinars, you can go to attleborowealth.com and you can see our special webinars, and our previous weekly webinars are on there. Or you can also go to YouTube. And if you haven't already, I'd love it if you go to YouTube and subscribe. And if you like the videos, you can like it and maybe leave a positive comment and hit the notification button so that you never miss a notification. And that's it for today. I will see you next week, and have a lovely week. I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.